Some love stories don't end with goodbye. They freeze in place, waiting for the right moment to thaw. Dr. Emma Chen is about to discover that you can run to the end of the earth to escape your past, but sometimes the universe traps you in negative 60 degrees with the one person you swore you'd never see again. The cargo plane cuts through Antarctic airspace, 7 hours from civilization, carrying one woman who's spent 8 years running. Emma grips her tablet displaying climate data she's memorized 3 times over. Because if she stops reading, she might remember what she's worked so hard to forget. She's 30 years old, a leading climate scientist, published and respected, and perfectly alone. She's made herself into a woman who doesn't need anyone, who's content with ice cores and research that matters more than messy human connection. At least, that's what she tells herself at 3 in the morning, when hotel rooms feel too empty and accolades feel too hollow. That's what she's been telling herself since the day she threw her engagement ring into Boston Harbor, watching it disappear like a promise that was never meant to be kept. 6 months at Glacier Point Research Station, studying catastrophic ice shelf collapse. 6 months of isolation and brutal cold, where the only escape is work. Work doesn't ask questions. Work doesn't demand vulnerability. Work doesn't leave you 3 days before your wedding with a 3-sentence email and a heart that learned to pump ice instead of blood. But here's the thing about running to the end of the earth. Sometimes you discover the earth is round, and all your running just brings you back to exactly where you started. Emma follows a cheerful graduate student named Yuki through the station's corridors, barely listening as boss. Yuki talks about ice cores and shower schedules and the documentary crew that just arrived yesterday. Documentary crew. Something cold crawls up Emma's spine. Documentary filmmaker. 6 months embedded with the team. No, she thinks, it can't be. The world is full of filmmakers, and this is Antarctica, the least likely place for the universe to have a sense of humor. The dining hall is cramped, filled with strangers trying to bond. Emma scans the faces, then freezes. Standing by the coffee station is a man with shoulders she'd recognize in the dark. Hands that once knew every inch of her body now wrapped around a mug like an anchor. He turns around. Their eyes meet. Time stretches, pulling like taffy, and Emma watches James Thornton's face cycle through shock, disbelief, pain, anger, then something worse. Careful blank neutrality that means he's feeling everything and showing nothing. James Thornton, the man she was supposed to marry 8 years ago. The man who chose a war zone over their wedding. The man whose letters she returned, unopened, until he stopped sending them. Standing 15 feet away in the most remote research station on Earth, looking older and harder and somehow more beautiful, with new scars and an expression that suggests he's just as thrilled about this as she is. Which is to say, not at all. Dr. Chen, meet our documentary filmmaker, James Thornton, Commander Rodriguez announces. Emma's brain is screaming. Her frozen heart is hammering against her ribs. We've met, she manages, a long time ago. The understatement has its own gravity. James adds simply, college. Nobody misses the tension. Emma demands a transfer. Rodriguez denies it immediately. You're both professionals who signed contracts. Your feelings don't get to matter more than data that could influence global climate policy. She's trapped. They're trapped for 6 months with nowhere to run and no way to avoid the 8-year-old wound that never properly healed. That night in the lab, James finds her. We'd talk. Emma keeps her back to him. We really shouldn't. But he persists, and finally, she explodes. 8 years of rage, demanding release. You left 3 days before our wedding. You sent an email, James. 3 sentences. That's what our future was worth. Don't talk to me about fair. He tries to explain, but she cuts him off. You didn't fight for us. You just left. We're not doing this. But as he leaves, James delivers his own truth. I looked for you for years. I wrote letters. You sent everything back unopened. You made sure I couldn't reach me, then blamed me for not fighting hard enough. The words hit like ice water, because he's right. Emma had chosen rage over curiosity, pride over understanding. She never asked why. She just assumed and built an entire narrative as armor for 8 years. But what if that narrative was wrong? Days pass in careful avoidance until the mandatory team-building dinner, where Rodriguez breaks out whiskey and suggests a game, truth or drink. When Raphael asks James his biggest regret, the table goes silent. James looks directly at Emma with raw, unguarded pain. Not fighting harder for someone I loved. I let her go without making sure she knew the truth, and I've regretted it every day since. Then Yuki turns to Emma. What about you, Dr. Chen? And Emma, whiskey burning, and 8 years of locked-down emotion pressing against her ribs, hears herself say, believing someone when they said they loved me, learning that people will always choose themselves over you, no matter what they promise. She flees to the observation deck. James follows. You never let me explain, he says. You decided you knew the whole story and shut me out completely. Emma whirls around. You sent an email. What else was there to understand? And then James delivers the truth that shatters everything. I was held hostage for 2 weeks in a Syrian rebel camp. I was kidnapped, beaten, kept with no way to tell you. By the time they let me go, you were gone. I didn't choose my career over you. I nearly died trying to get back to you. Emma's legs give out. 8 years of narrative, crumbling like a calving glacier. The letters? She whispers. What did they say? James slides down beside her. The truth. All of it. The kidnapping, the hospital. How much I missed you. I sent 63 letters over 3 years. You sent all of them back. 63 letters. Emma sees it now. The story she told herself versus what actually happened. She was so hurt, so afraid of vulnerability. She chose anger over understanding, built a fortress, and called it strength, when really it was fear. I didn't know, she whispers. But you didn't want to know, James replies gently. You decided I was the villain and never looked back. They sit in silence, both processing, both somewhere between rage and grief. What do we do now? Emma asks. James looks at her with hope and heartbreak mixed together. I don't know. But we have 6 months. Maybe that's enough time to figure out if we can forgive each other. Or maybe it's just enough time to properly say goodbye. Later, alone in her quarters, Emma cries for the first time in 8 years. Not angry tears or bitter tears, but something deeper. Tears for two 22-year-olds who loved and lost each other through circumstance and miscommunication. Tears for letters never read. For truth never heard. For 8 years, spent building lives around a wound that might have healed if they'd just talked. And beneath the tears, something small and fragile and terrifying that looks like hope. Because here's the thing about being trapped in Antarctica with your ex-fiancé. You can't run anymore. You're forced to face it. The good, the bad, and the complicated, messy middle where love and hurt and regret tangle together into something that might be healing if you're brave enough to let it. Emma has 6 months to figure it out. 6 months in the coldest place on Earth, with the one person who once made her feel warmest. The question is, when you're given a second chance at a love you thought was dead, when you learn the story you told yourself was incomplete, when you're trapped with nowhere to run, what do you choose? Do you protect yourself and maintain the safe life you've built? Or do you take the risk, open yourself to potential heartbreak, and see if maybe, just maybe, some things are worth fighting for after all? The blizzard hits on day 14, and it changes everything. But before we get to the storm that will trap Emma and James together, in a way that makes the entire research station seem spacious, before we get to the moment when survival depends on the two people who can barely look at each other without flinching, we need to talk about what happens when truth doesn't heal. It complicates, because knowing that James didn't abandon Emma, that he was kidnapped and beaten and nearly died trying to get back to her, doesn't erase 8 years of pain. It just adds guilt to the grief, regret to the rage, and transforms their relationship from something simple and broken into something infinitely more complex and dangerous. The morning after their observation deck confession, Emma wakes up with swollen eyes and a headache that has nothing to do with altitude. She stares at the ceiling of her tiny quarters and tries to process what she learned. 63 letters, a kidnapping, 2 weeks of torture while she was choosing flowers and seating arrangements, and convincing herself she was better off alone. The narrative she's been carrying like a shield for 8 years, James the villain, Emma the victim, end of story, has shattered, and she doesn't know what to build in its place. Because here's the uncomfortable truth that nobody talks about when discussing second chances. Sometimes learning you were wrong doesn't make things better. Sometimes it makes them infinitely worse. Sometimes it means you have to look in the mirror and acknowledge that you weren't just hurt. You were cruel. That you took someone's trauma and made it about your own abandonment. That you spent 8 years punishing someone for a crime they didn't commit. Emma gets dressed, heads to the lab, and finds James already there with his camera, filming roll of the ice core samples. He looks as exhausted as she feels. Dark circles under his eyes, hair uncombed, the careful facade he usually maintains completely absent. When he sees her, he doesn't smile or acknowledge their conversation. He just nods once, a simple recognition of shared space, and goes back to his work. And somehow that's worse than anger or awkwardness or any of the other emotional responses Emma might have expected. It's the nod of someone who said everything they needed to say and is now waiting to see what the other person does with it. It's the nod of someone who's already grieving what they know they can't have. Emma wants to say something, an apology, an explanation, anything to fill the terrible silence between them. But what do you say to someone when "I'm sorry" doesn't begin to cover the magnitude of what you've done? When "I didn't know" sounds like an excuse rather than a reason. When the only honest thing you can offer is "I was hurt and scared, and I chose my pain over your truth. And I don't know if I can forgive myself for that, let alone ask you to forgive me." So instead, she says nothing. She goes to her workstation, pulls up her data, and pretends that her hands aren't shaking and her heart isn't breaking, and the man 10 feet away from her isn't simultaneously a stranger and the person who knows her better than anyone else ever has. But the universe, as we've established, has no patience for avoidance. The universe has decided that Emma Chen and James Thornton are going to deal with their past, and it's prepared to use every tool at its disposal, isolation, proximity, and now life-threatening danger, to make that happen. Dr. Marcus Webb notices the tension immediately. He's been at enough remote research stations to recognize the signs of interpersonal drama, and he's also lived long enough to know that unresolved emotional conflict in close quarters is like a gas leak, invisible until it explodes. So he does what good mentors do. He creates situations that force interaction without being obvious about it. "Emma," Marcus says during the morning briefing, "I need you to lead the ice shelf expedition today. We're seeing some unusual fracture patterns that need immediate documentation." He turns to James, "And I need comprehensive footage. This could be the most important data we collect all season. You'll need to go together. Safety protocols require partners for any work beyond the station perimeter." Emma's jaw tightens. James's expression remains carefully neutral. Rodriguez, standing by the briefing board, raises an eyebrow in a way that suggests she knows exactly what Marcus is doing and approves completely. And that's how Emma and James find themselves 2 hours later, suited up in extreme cold weather gear, tethered together by a safety line, walking across the Antarctic ice toward a massive fracture in the back. Thwaites shelf that looks like the planet itself is breaking open. The cold is absolute. Even through multiple layers of insulation, Emma can feel it trying to steal her body heat, her breath freezing instantly into ice crystals that cling to the inside of her face mask. The wind is brutal, pushing against them like a living thing that wants them gone. And the landscape is both beautiful and terrifying. Endless white, broken only by the dark slash of the fracture, a wound in the ice that drops hundreds of feet down into black water. This is what Emma came to Antarctica to study: the catastrophic collapse of ice shelves, the visible evidence of climate change, the data that could influence policy and save lives. This is her life's work. But right now, tethered to James with 30 feet of rope and a shared oxygen supply, all she can think about is how fragile everything is. The ice beneath their feet, the air in their tanks, the second chance she's been given and doesn't know if she deserves. James is filming, his camera capturing the fracture from every angle, but Emma can feel him watching her too. Not obviously. James has always been good at multitasking, at appearing focused on one thing while actually paying attention to something else entirely. She remembers this from college, how he could be editing footage while simultaneously listening to her talk about her research, how he always seemed to know what she needed before she asked. That attentiveness used to make her feel cherished. Now it makes her feel exposed, like he can see through all her carefully constructed defenses to the scared woman underneath who's terrified of being vulnerable again. They work in silence for an hour, Emma taking measurements and core samples, while James documents everything. The professional distance should be comforting. They're just two people doing their jobs. Nothing personal. Nothing complicated. But then Emma moves too close to the fracture edge, and the ice beneath her shifts. A subtle movement that sends cracks spiderwebbing out from where she's standing. James sees it before she does. He's moving before she can process what's happening, grabbing the safety line and pulling hard, yanking her backward just as the section of ice she was standing on breaks away and tumbles into the dark water below. Emma lands hard on her back, the wind knocked out of her, staring up at the Antarctic sky while her brain catches up with what almost happened. She almost fell. She almost died. If James hadn't been paying attention, if he hadn't reacted instantly, she would have plunged into water so cold that unconsciousness would have come in minutes and death shortly after. The safety line would have held, probably, but in Antarctic conditions, probably is never good enough. James kneels beside her, his face close to hers through their masks, and Emma can see the terror in his eyes, not the calm, collected professional he's been maintaining for 2 weeks, but something raw and afraid and deeply human. "Are you okay?" His voice crackles through the radio, distorted but urgent. Emma nods, still trying to catch her breath. "I'm fine. Thank you. I wasn't paying attention. You could have died." James cuts her off, and there's something in his voice that Emma can't quite identify. Anger? Relief? The complicated mixture of both. "Emma, you could have died, and I—" He stops, seems to realize he's saying too much, revealing too much. He stands, offers her his hand, pulls her to her feet. "We should head back. We have enough data for today." But Emma doesn't move. She's standing on ice that could break apart at any moment, tethered to a man who just saved her life, and suddenly all the careful emotional distance they've been maintaining feels absurd. They're in Antarctica. They could die out here, from the cold, from the ice, from any of 1,000 dangers that don't care about their complicated history, or their wounded pride, or their fear of vulnerability. And Emma realizes something that should have been obvious from the start. You can't half commit to survival. You can't be sort of partners in a place this dangerous. You're either all in, trusting each other completely, or you're both already dead. "Wait," Emma's voice is steady, despite the adrenaline still coursing through her system. "I need to say something. I've been thinking about what you told me, about the kidnapping and the letters and everything I didn't know, and I keep trying to figure out how to apologize, what words would be enough to cover 8 years of me being wrong about you. But there aren't words big enough, James. I was hurt, and I was scared, and I made you the villain, because that was easier than facing the possibility that sometimes terrible things happen, and nobody's to blame. I took your trauma and made it about my abandonment, and I'm so sorry for that. I'm sorry I never gave you a chance to explain. I'm sorry I sent the letters back. I'm sorry that when you needed understanding, I gave you silence. And I know that sorry doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I see it now. I see what I did, and I'm going to have to live with that." The wind howls around them. James is silent for so long that Emma thinks maybe her radio cut out. Maybe he didn't hear her. But then he speaks, and his voice is rough with emotion. "I spent 3 years trying to reach you. 3 years writing letters and leaving voicemails and showing up at places I thought you might be. I told myself that if I could just explain, if you could just hear the truth, everything would be okay. But Emma, the truth is complicated. Yes, I was kidnapped. Yes, I almost died. But I also chose to take that assignment in the first place. I chose to go to a war zone weeks before our wedding, because I convinced myself I was doing it for us, for our future, when maybe part of me was just scared of the commitment. 22, and engaged in planning a whole life when I barely knew who I was. Maybe part of me needed the escape. So you're not the only one who has to live with difficult truths. I've been living with mine for 8 years too. This is the moment. This is where two people who loved each other and lost each other and hurt each other in ways that seemed unforgivable start the slow, painful work of forgiveness. Not because forgiveness is easy or simple, or because time heals all wounds. Time doesn't heal anything. It just gives you distance. But because standing on breaking ice in the coldest place on earth, they both realize that holding onto old pain is a luxury neither of them can afford anymore. That if they're going to survive the next 6 months, not just physically but emotionally, they need to find a way to coexist that isn't built on careful avoidance and professional distance. They need to find a way back to what they once were, or, failing that, forward to something new. They walk back to the station in silence. But it's a different kind of silence. Not the weighted, uncomfortable quiet of people avoiding each other, but the contemplative silence of people processing something significant. When they reach the airlock and begin the lengthy process of decontamination and warming up, Marcus is there waiting. He takes one look at them, at Emma's shaken expression and James's protective stance, and his eyes narrow with concern. What happened out there? Close call with the ice, Emma says. Nothing serious. James pulled me back in time. Close call. Marcus repeats the words like he's tasting them, finding them insufficient. You're both experienced enough to know that close calls in Antarctica are how people die. What were you thinking, getting that close to an unstable edge? I was thinking about my research, Emma admits. I got distracted. Detracted. Now Marcus's concern shifts to something else. Disappointment, maybe, or frustration. Emma, I've worked with you for 5 years. You don't get distracted. You're the most focused researcher I know. So what's really going on? Emma glances at James, who's carefully removing his gloves with the intense concentration of someone who doesn't want to be part of this conversation. But Marcus catches the look, and suddenly his expression clears with understanding. Ah, I see. The mysterious college history is interfering with the work. It's not, Emma starts, but Marcus holds up a hand. I'm going to tell you both something I learned the hard way. 20 years ago, I was married to a brilliant woman. We worked together, traveled together, built a career together, and then we stopped talking about anything except work. We stopped being partners and became colleagues. We were so professional, so careful about maintaining boundaries, that we forgot we were supposed to love each other. By the time I realized what we'd lost, she was gone. Filed for divorce, moved to New Zealand, married someone who actually talked to her about things that mattered. Marcus looks between them. Whatever history you two have, deal with it. Because right now you're doing exactly what I did, using work as a shield against vulnerability. And let me tell you, professional distance is a hell of a lot lonelier than just being honest about the fact that you're both clearly still affected by each other. He walks away, leaving Emma and James standing in the decontamination area, both of them stripped of their outer layers and their emotional armor, both of them faced with a truth they've been avoiding. They can't keep doing this. They can't keep pretending they're strangers who, happen to know each other once. They can't keep letting 8 years of unresolved history dictate their present. Something has to change. That night, Emma makes a decision. She's never been good at vulnerability, at reaching out, at admitting she needs something from someone else. That's part of why she sent James's letters back. Reading them would have required her to feel things she wasn't ready to feel, to confront possibilities she'd already decided were impossible. But Marcus is right. Professional distance isn't protecting her. It's just making her lonely. So she does something that terrifies her. She knocks on James's door. He answers looking surprised and wary and hopeful all at once, wearing sweatpants and a faded t-shirt from a film festival they attended together in college. Emma remembers that shirt, remembers stealing it from his drawer and wearing it to bed, remembers how it smelled like him. The memory hits her with unexpected force. This small piece of their shared past that somehow survived 8 years and international moves and everything that broke between them. Can we talk? Ba asks. James steps aside, letting her into quarters that are identical to hers but somehow entirely different. His camera equipment organized meticulously on the desk, photographs pinned to the wall showing places Emma's never been, people she doesn't know. A whole life James built without her. There's a comfort to seeing this evidence of his independence, proof that he moved on and thrived and became someone beyond the 22-year-old boy she left behind. But there's also a strange sadness to it, this visual representation of all the years they lost. I've been thinking about what you said, Emma begins, staying by the door because sitting down feels too intimate, too much like she's planning to stay. About how you were scared too, about the commitment. And I realized I never asked you about that, about what you were feeling before the wedding. I just assumed you were as certain as I was, as ready as I was. But we were kids, James. 22 years old and planning forever when we barely understood ourselves. Of course you were scared. I was scared too. I just never admitted it. James sits on his bed, elbows on his knees, looking at her with an expression that's achingly familiar. This is how he used to look when he was editing footage late at night, completely absorbed in trying to get something exactly right. What were you scared of? Everything. Losing myself. Becoming one of those women who gives up her dreams for a man and then resents him for it. Being left. Emma laughs bitterly. That one turned out to be prescient, didn't it? Though not in the way I expected. Emma, no, let me finish. I need to say this while I still have the courage. I was scared, so I made rules. I made plans. I controlled everything I could control because, at least that way, if something went wrong, I'd have the illusion that I'd prepared for it. But the thing about control is that it's just fear in a professional outfit. I wasn't being strong, I was being terrified. And when you didn't show up for the wedding, it confirmed every fear I'd been carrying. Of course, he left. Of course, I wasn't enough. Of course, choosing me wasn't worth whatever opportunity he found. I'd been waiting for the abandonment my whole life, and you handed it to me exactly when I expected it. Except I didn't leave. I was taken, I know. And that's what I'm trying to say. My fear created a narrative that wasn't true. I saw what I expected to see because I'd already decided that's how the story would end. And I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry I didn't love you enough to question my assumptions. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to read the letters or take your calls or give you 5 minutes to tell me what actually happened. James is quiet for a long time, processing. Then he stands, crosses to his desk, opens a drawer, and pulls out a battered notebook. "I kept writing," he says quietly, "even after you stopped sending the letters back. Even after I knew you'd never read them. I kept writing because it was the only way I could still talk to you." He holds out the notebook. 63 letters you sent back, and 78 more I never sent at all. 141 letters over 8 years, telling you everything I couldn't say about the kidnapping and the recovery and starting my career and the awards and the relationships that never worked because none of them were you. How I kept seeing you in random places. A woman with your laugh in a Paris cafe. Someone with your walk crossing a street in Tokyo. Your profile in a crowd at Sundance. About how I both desperately wanted to run into you and was terrified it would actually happen. Because what would I even say after all that silence? He's holding out the notebook, but Emma can't take it. If she takes it, she'll have to read it. If she reads it, she'll have to feel everything she's been protecting herself from for 8 years. If she feels it, she might break. And Emma Chen doesn't break. She's made a career out of not breaking, out of staying composed and professional and in control no matter what. Except she's not Dr. Chen right now. She's just Emma, standing in her ex-fiance's quarters in Antarctica, being offered 141 pieces of his heart that she doesn't know if she's strong enough to hold. "I can't," she whispers. "James, I can't. Not yet. It's too much." He nods, understanding, and puts the notebook back in the drawer. But the knowledge of it sits between them now. This record of 8 years of pain and growth and continued connection that existed entirely in one direction. Emma wonders if that's what love looks like when it has nowhere to go. It just keeps pouring out anyway, finding new channels, refusing to be contained by rejection or silence, or the reasonable conclusion that it's time to move on. "What do we do now?" Emma asks. And she's starting to realize this is becoming their question. The thing they ask each other when the path forward isn't clear. "I think," James says slowly, "we try to be friends. Or at least friendly. We have 6 months here, Emma. We can spend them avoiding each other and making everyone uncomfortable, or we can try to rebuild something. Maybe not what we had. I'm not sure that's possible, or even advisable. But something honest. Thing real. 2 people who loved each other once and hurt each other badly are trying to figure out if there's anything left worth salvaging. Friends. The word should be simple. Should be a relief, even. A clear boundary that protects them both from further hurt. But standing there looking at James, at this man who once knew her completely and now barely knows her at all, Emma realizes that friends might be the hardest thing they could attempt. Because friends talk, friends share, friends are vulnerable with each other in ways that Emma has spent 8 years avoiding. Friends require exactly the kind of emotional openness that led to her getting hurt in the first place. But what's the alternative? 6 months of this careful dance they've been doing. This exhausting performance of indifference. 6 months of Marcus and Rodriguez and everyone else watching them tiptoe around each other like the past doesn't exist, when clearly it's the only thing that does exist. The only thing that matters. The gravitational center around which everything else orbits. "Okay," Emma hears herself say. "Friends. We can try friends." And just like that, something shifts, not heals. Healing is too simple a word for what needs to happen between them. But shifts, like tectonic plates moving after being locked in place for too long, creating new landscapes and new possibilities, and probably a fair amount of earthquakes before the ground settles again. They smile at each other, tentative and uncertain, and Emma leaves his quarters feeling simultaneously lighter and more terrified than she has in years. Because friendship with James means dismantling the walls she's built. It means letting him see the person she's become without him. It means admiring the person he's become without her. And it means acknowledging that maybe, possibly, the story they thought ended 8 years ago is actually still being written. The next morning at breakfast, Emma sits next to James. It's a small thing, barely notable to anyone watching, but for them, it's seismic. Yuki's eyes go wide with delight. Raphael grins like he's just won a bet. Marcus nods approvingly. And Rodriguez just sips her coffee with the expression of someone who saw this coming from day one and is simply pleased the slow-moving train has finally reached its destination. They start talking, careful at first, sticking to safe topics like the weather. Brutal and the food. Terrible and the latest ice core data. Concerning. But slowly, as days pass, the conversations deepen. James tells Emma about his career, about the documentaries he's made, and the places he's traveled and the close calls he's had in places even more dangerous than Syria. He doesn't dwell on the kidnapping, but he doesn't avoid it either. It's just one story among many. Significant, but not defining. Emma tells him about her research, about the papers she's published, and the conferences she's spoken at, and the slow, satisfying process of building a reputation based purely on competence and brilliant work. She doesn't mention the loneliness, but James is smart enough to read between the lines, to see what she's not saying. They fall into a routine, breakfast together, then separate for work, then lunch where they swap stories and jokes, then more work where James films Emma's research with a new intimacy that makes the footage stunning. Then dinner with the team, where they sit together and contribute to. Conversations like normal colleagues instead of two people, performing elaborate emotional avoidance. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, something starts to change. The anger Emma's been carrying begins to soften. The guilt James has been shouldering begins to ease. They start remembering why they loved each other in the first place. Not just the big romantic gestures, but the small daily things, the way James always pours Emma's coffee before his own, the way Emma laughs at his terrible jokes, even when they're not funny, the way they can work in comfortable silence, both absorbed in their tasks, but aware of each other's presence. The way they still, after 8 years apart, move around each other like dancers who remember the choreography even if they haven't performed together in years. But here's what they don't talk about: the fact that every time their hands brush passing equipment, Emma's heart stutters. The fact that James watches her when he thinks she's not looking, and his expression suggests he's remembering things he's trying very hard to forget. The fact that friends is starting to feel insufficient for what's building between them. Something more complicated than friendship, but not quite ready to be called anything else. The fact that they're both terrified of what happens if they acknowledge the obvious truth. They're falling for each other again. Or maybe they never stopped falling. They just learned to pretend the ground wasn't rushing up to meet them. And then, on day 37, the universe decides they've had enough time to ease into things. The universe decides it's time for the main event. The universe sends the blizzard. It starts as a routine expedition. Emma and James, plus Yuki and Raphael, heading out to document accelerated melting in a section of the ice shelf 3 kilometers from the station. The weather forecast is clear. The protocols are followed. Everyone is experienced and prepared. But Antarctic weather doesn't care about forecasts or protocols or human preparation. Antarctic weather has its own agenda, and that morning its agenda is to teach 4 humans exactly how small and fragile they are. The storm hits like a wall. One moment there's visibility, the next there's nothing but white, snow so thick and wind so violent that Emma can't see her own hands in front of her face. The temperature drops 20 degrees in 5 minutes. The wind tears at their safety lines, threatening to snap them like thread. And suddenly the routine expedition becomes a survival situation. And survival situations in Antarctica have a way of stripping away everything. Pride, anger, carefully maintained boundaries, until all that's left is the essential truth of what matters. We need shelter now. Marcus's voice crackles over the radio, barely audible above the wind. He's back at the station, watching their positions on GPS, and Emma can hear the fear in his voice that he's trying to hide. There's an emergency shelter 0.5 kilometers northwest of your position. Can you make it? Emma checks her GPS, but the screen is already icing over, the numbers barely visible. 0.5 kilometers. In a whiteout, with wind strong enough to knock them off their feet and cold severe enough to freeze exposed skin in under a minute. It might as well be 50 kilometers. But what choice do they have? The station is 3 kilometers away, and they'd never make it. The shelter is their only option. We can make it, Emma says, with more confidence than she feels. She looks at James through the snow, can barely see his outline 3 feet away, and remembers 1,000 other moments when she trusted him completely. Crossing busy streets, trying new foods, jumping off cliffs into water she couldn't see the bottom of. Remembers how he always caught her, always kept her safe, right up until the moment when he couldn't. But right now, in this moment, she has no choice but to trust him again. Stay close, stay tethered. If anyone falls, the others hold position. Understood? The 4 of them move through the blizzard like mountain climbers ascending Everest, slow, methodical, every step a negotiation with physics and probability and the brutal indifference of nature. Emma leads, GPS clutched in one hand, the other gripping the safety line that connects them all. Behind her is James, then Yuki, then Raphael. Every few minutes, Emma stops, checks their position, adjusts their heading, and keeps moving. The cold is past the point of painful. It's moved into that dangerous territory where your body starts shutting down non-essential systems to protect the vital ones, where thinking becomes harder, and decisions slower, and the temptation to just lie down in the snow starts to seem reasonable. 0.4 kilometers. 0.3. They're making progress, but the storm is intensifying, and Emma realizes with cold clarity that they might not all make it. She's the leader. She's responsible. If someone dies out here, it will be her fault for not predicting this, not preparing better, not moving faster. The thought should terrify her, but instead it clarifies things, strips away everything except the simple math of survival. 4 people need to reach shelter, whatever it takes, no matter the cost. 0.2 kilometers. Emma's legs are barely working. She can hear Yuki crying behind her, can hear Raphael trying to encourage her, can hear James's steady breathing that tells her he's in pain but controlling it. 0.1 kilometers. The shelter should be visible now, but Emma can't see anything except white and more white, and the horrifying possibility that they've miscalculated, that the shelter isn't where the GPS says it is, that they're all about to die, 90 meters away from safety they'll never find. And then James's hand is on her shoulder, his mouth by her ear, shouting above the wind, "There! 10 o'clock!" And Emma turns and sees it. A small structure barely visible through the snow, exactly where it's supposed to be. They stumble toward it together, Emma's legs finally giving out 20 feet from the door, James catching her, half carrying her the remaining distance while Raphael supports Yuki. They crash through the shelter door in a tangle of frozen limbs and survival gear, and the sudden absence of wind is so shocking that for a moment no one can do anything except lie there breathing. The shelter is small, barely large enough for 4 people, equipped with emergency heating, basic supplies, and a radio. Raphael gets the heater running, while James helps Emma and Yuki out of their ice-covered outer layers. Everyone is hypothermic to varying degrees. Everyone is exhausted. And everyone is alive, which right now seems like the only thing that matters. "Station, this is Expedition Team," Emma manages through chattering teeth. "We've reached Shelter Point Echo 7. 4 personnel safe. Multiple cases of mild hypothermia. Requesting status update." Rodriguez's voice comes back crackling with relief. "Copy that. Thank God. The storm is forecast to last 48 hours minimum. You'll need to shelter in place. Do you have sufficient supplies?" Emma looks around the small space, doing the mental math. 4 people, 48 hours, limited food and water, 1 heater that's already struggling. "We'll make it work." "Good. Stay warm. Stay safe. Check in every 4 hours." Rodriguez out. The radio goes silent. The 4 of them look at each other, the reality of their situation sinking in. 48 hours in a space barely large enough to sleep. 48 hours with limited supplies and limited heat, while outside the storm rages with a violence that makes their survival seem less like certainty and more like a temporary condition that nature might revoke at any moment. 48 hours where every decision matters, and every mistake could be fatal. But Emma's not thinking about any of that. She's thinking about the fact that James just carried her 20 feet through a blizzard. That his first concern, after reaching shelter, was making sure she was okay. That 8 years and all the hurt between them disappeared the moment survival was on the line, and he became again what he always was, the person who would protect her above all else. And she's thinking about what that means, what it suggests about feelings she thought were dead and buried, but are apparently very much alive and demanding attention. Yuki and Raphael huddle together for warmth, already half asleep from exhaustion. That leaves Emma and James sitting against opposite walls of the tiny shelter, both of them too cold and too wired to sleep, both of them acutely aware that they're about to spend 48 hours in forced proximity with nowhere to hide and nothing to distract them from the conversation they've been avoiding for 37 days. "So," James says, his voice rough with cold and exhaustion, 48 hours. "What should we talk about?" And Emma, still shaking with adrenaline and hypothermia and the visceral awareness of how close they all just came to dying, starts to laugh. It's the kind of laugh that's more about releasing tension than humor. The kind that might tip into crying if she's not careful. "We could talk about how we almost died, or how Marcus is going to kill us for not checking the weather more carefully. Or we could just sit here in awkward silence for 2 days. Or, James says slowly, carefully, we could talk about what's actually happening between us. Emma's laugh dies. The shelter suddenly feels even smaller than it is. What's happening between us? Don't do that. Don't pretend you don't know what I'm talking about. We've been dancing around it for over a month now, ever since we decided to be friends. But Emma, we're not friends. We've never been friends. We're two people who were in love and got ripped apart before we could figure out if that love could survive reality. And now we're back together in the most intense, isolated situation imaginable, working side by side every day, and all those feelings we've been trying to ignore are still there. I know you feel it. I see it in the way you look at me when you think I'm not paying attention. I feel it when our hands touch and you pull away like I've burned you. So let's stop pretending and just admit the truth. This thing between us isn't dead. It's just been waiting. The truth lands like a bomb in the small shelter. Yuki and Raphael are asleep, or at least pretending to be, giving them the illusion of privacy. Outside, the storm howls. Inside Emma's chest, her heart is racing in a way that has nothing to do with hypothermia and everything to do with the fact that James just said the thing they've both been thinking. And once it's said out loud, it can't be unsaid. And what good does admitting it do? Emma asks quietly. So we still have feelings for each other. So what? Feelings weren't our problem 8 years ago. We had plenty of feelings. Our problem was that we were kids playing at adult commitments, scared of things we couldn't name, unable to communicate when it mattered. What makes you think we're any different now? Because now we know what it costs to not fight for something. Because we've spent 8 years apart building separate lives, becoming whole people on our own. And maybe that's what we needed. Maybe we needed to learn who we were independently before we could figure out who we might be together. Maybe we needed to make all the mistakes and feel all the regret and carry all that pain so we'd know, absolutely know, what matters and what doesn't. James shifts closer, and in the small space that means he's suddenly right there, close enough that Emma can see the gold flecks in his brown eyes, close enough that she can feel the heat radiating from his body even through their layers of thermal clothing, close enough that all the careful distance they've been maintaining becomes impossible to sustain. What matters? Emma whispers, terrified of the answer, but needing to hear it anyway. You, this, us, whatever we were and whatever we could still be. Emma, I loved you when I was 22 and didn't know how to love someone without losing myself. I loved you when I was kidnapped thinking I'd die without ever seeing you again. I loved you through 3 years of returned letters and 5 more years of accepting you'd moved on. And I love you now, in this tiny shelter in Antarctica, with all our history and all our mistakes laid bare between us. I love you with all the wisdom of someone who's lived without you and knows exactly what that cost. So yes, admitting it matters, because I'm done pretending I don't feel it. I'm done protecting myself from the possibility of getting hurt again. Life is too short and too uncertain and too goddamn cold to waste it on anything less than the truth. The confession hangs in the air between them, enormous and terrifying and impossible to take back. Emma's brain is screaming at her to retreat, to throw up walls, to protect herself from the vulnerability of admitting that she feels the same way. Because she does feel the same way. She's been feeling it since day one when James turned around in the dining hall, and she realized that 8 years and an entire career built on emotional distance hadn't done anything to diminish what she felt for him. If anything, it made it worse. Made her realize what she'd given up, what she'd thrown away out of fear and pride and the inability to see past her own pain. But here's the thing about life-threatening situations. They strip away pretense. When you've just survived a blizzard that could have killed you, when you're trapped in an emergency shelter with the man who carried you to safety, when you're faced with the very real possibility that either of you could die tomorrow from exposure or accident or any of the 1,000 dangers that come with Antarctic research, you stop caring about protecting yourself. You start caring about truth. "I'm terrified," Emma says, and her voice is shaking but steady. "James, I'm absolutely terrified. Because you're right. I do still love you. I never stopped. I just got very good at pretending I didn't, at building a life that didn't have space for you, at convincing myself I was better off alone. But I'm not better off. I'm just alone. And these past weeks working with you, talking to you, remembering what it felt like to be with someone who actually sees me. It's been the best and worst thing that could have happened. Best because I forgot how good it feels to not be lonely. Worst because now I remember exactly what I lost, exactly what I threw away, and I don't know if I deserve a second chance at it." "Emma," let me finish. "I need to say this while I still have the courage. I was cruel to you. I took your trauma and made it about my abandonment. I refused to hear your truth because I'd already decided what the truth was, and my version cast me as the victim, and you as the villain. And that was easier than facing the complicated reality that sometimes terrible things happen, and love isn't enough to fix them. I sent back 63 letters without reading them. 63 times you reached out, and I slapped your hand away. And I don't know how to forgive myself for that, let alone ask you to forgive me. You already asked. Back in my quarters, and I already forgave you. Emma, we were both kids doing the best we could with impossible circumstances. Yes, you hurt me by not giving me a chance to explain, but I hurt you first by taking that assignment, by not talking to you about my fears, thinking I could build us a future without actually consulting you about what that future should look like. We both made mistakes. We both carry regrets. But we're not those kids anymore. We're adults who've learned and grown, and maybe, possibly, might be capable of doing better this time. But what does that mean? We finish this mission, and then what? I have a job in Cambridge. You have a contract in the Arctic. We're still two people with demanding careers, and lives on different continents. How is this time any different from last time? Because this time we're choosing each other knowing exactly what it costs. This time we're not kids with idealistic notions of love conquering all. We're adults who understand that relationships require work and compromise and constant communication. This time, we know that choosing each other doesn't mean sacrificing ourselves. It means building something big enough to hold both our dreams. James reaches out, takes Emma's hand in his, and she doesn't pull away. I'm not asking you to give up Cambridge. I'm not asking you to follow me to the Arctic. I'm asking if you want to try building a life where we both get to chase our dreams and come home to each other, where we do the hard work of coordinating schedules and making time and being honest when it's difficult instead of running away, where we love each other not despite our ambitions but because of them. Emma looks down at their joined hands, hers scarred from years of fieldwork, his marked with the white lines from his kidnapping. Both of them damaged. Both of them survivors. Both of them terrified and hopeful in equal measure. And she thinks about what James said earlier. Life is too short and too uncertain to waste it on anything less than the truth. She thinks about Marcus's story of losing his wife, to professional distance. She thinks about 8 years of being alone and calling it strength, when really it was just fear wearing a clever disguise. "Okay," she whispers. "Okay? Okay. Let's try. Let's see if we can do better this time. Let's see if we can build something that holds both of us, without requiring either of us to become smaller. I don't know if it'll work. I don't know if we can coordinate careers on different continents and maintain a relationship that's already survived one catastrophic failure. But I know I don't want to spend another 8 years wondering what if. I know I don't want to wake up at 40 or 50 or 60 and realize I let you go twice out of fear. So yes. Okay, let's try." James's smile is incandescent. Relief and joy and disbelief all mixed together. He pulls her closer, and in the tiny shelter with Yuki and Raphael sleeping 3 feet away, and the storm raging outside, and their future entirely uncertain, he kisses her. And it's like coming home after a very long journey to discover that home isn't a place at all. It's a person. It's this person. It's the way James's hand cups her face like she's something precious. It's the way Emma's fingers curl into his jacket like she's afraid he'll disappear if she lets go. It's the way they fit together after 8 years apart, muscle memory and new discovery all at once. They kiss until they're both warm despite the cold, until Yuki makes a noise in her sleep that might be knowing laughter, until the risk of waking their companions forces them to separate and sit with foreheads pressed together, breathing hard, both of them grinning like idiots. "So," James says, 48 hours trapped in a tiny shelter. Want to talk about logistics? About how we make this work when the mission ends?" "God, no," Emma laughs. "Let's have this moment. Let's be 2 people who love each other and survived a blizzard and are choosing each other despite every logical reason not to. We'll figure out the logistics later. Right now, I just want to sit here with you and not be scared for 5 minutes." So they do. They sit together in the small shelter while the storm tries its best to kill them, while Yuki and Raphael sleep the sleep of the utterly exhausted, while back at the station Marcus and Rodriguez worry and wait, probably place bets on whether Emma and James will finally get their act together. They sit and talk in whispers about nothing important: favorite films, terrible fieldwork stories, the weird food they've eaten in various countries. They remember what it was like when loving each other was simple, before life and distance and trauma complicated everything. And they imagine what it might be like moving forward. Not simple, probably never simple again, but maybe something better than simple. Maybe something real. The 48 hours in the shelter become a turning point. When the storm finally breaks and they make their way back to the station, something fundamental has shifted. They're not hiding anymore. They're not performing careful distance. They're just 2 people who love each other, who are choosing each other, who are committed to doing the hard work of figuring out how to make it work, despite the obstacles. The rest of the team notices immediately. Marcus's smile is knowing and satisfied. The smile of someone who's been waiting for this outcome since day 1. Rodriguez just nods approvingly and mutters something about time. Yuki and Raphael, who were awake for at least part of the shelter conversation, despite pretending otherwise, trade triumphant looks. And Emma and James just accept the knowing glances and teasing comments. Because what else can they do? Everyone saw this coming, except them. The work continues, research and filming, and the daily rhythm of station life. But now James films Emma with a camera that loves her, capturing not just the scientist, but the woman behind the data. Now Emma talks to James about her research, with the passion she usually reserves for peer-reviewed papers. Now they eat meals together, and walk the corridors together, and fall asleep in each other's quarters, more nights than not, making up for 8 years of sleeping alone. And yes, they still have hard conversations about Cambridge and the Arctic, and how they'll coordinate 2 careers that exist on different continents, about whether Emma will take the director position or negotiate something more flexible, about whether James can restructure his Arctic contract, or he should let it go entirely, about money and logistics and all the practical considerations that come with trying to build a life together when you're both professionals with established careers and established lives. But here's what's different this time. They're having the conversations. They're not avoiding the difficult topics, or assuming they'll figure it out later, or hoping that love alone will be enough. They're doing the work. They're making compromises. They're building something intentional and thoughtful and real until day 75, when everything threatens to fall apart again. The message comes during dinner. Emma's phone buzzes, a rare event since communications with the outside world are limited and unreliable. She glances at it casually, expecting a routine update from her department. Instead, she sees an email from the Cambridge Climate Institute with the subject line, "Director Position Timeline. Urgent." Her hand starts shaking before she even opens it. James notices immediately, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. What is it? Emma reads the email once, twice, 3 times, hoping the words will somehow change. They don't. Cambridge needs an answer. The director position starts in 3 months instead of 6. They need someone immediately. Either I take it, or they're offering it to the runner-up. The table goes quiet. Everyone is suddenly very interested in their food. Marcus clears his throat uncomfortably. Rodriguez finds something fascinating on the wall to examine. And James just looks at Emma with an expression that's trying very hard to be supportive, but is clearly screaming underneath. 3 months, James says carefully. That's when my Arctic contract starts. No. So if you take Cambridge, we'd have even less time together than we thought. 3 months to figure out everything. We said we'd have 6 months to figure out. They excuse themselves from dinner, walk in silence to Emma's quarters, close the door, and stare at each other across the small space. This is the moment. This is where they find out if everything they've built over the past 70 to 5 days is strong enough to survive the exact same conflict that destroyed them 8 years ago. Career versus love, ambition versus relationship. The impossible choice between dreams and the person you dream about. Tell me what you're thinking, James says. I'm thinking that this is exactly what I was afraid of. That we'd fall in love again, and something would come up, and we'd have to choose, and someone would get hurt, and it would all be for nothing. Emma, I'm also thinking that Cambridge is my dream job. I've worked my entire career for this opportunity, and I'm angry that I have to choose. I'm angry that the universe is forcing this decision when I explicitly said I didn't want to be in this position again. And I'm terrified because I know what the smart choice is, what the safe choice is, and I'm terrified that I'm going to make it and lose you in the process. James is silent for a long moment. When he speaks, his voice is very quiet and very sad. You're going to take it, aren't you? Emma stops, because the truth is, she doesn't know. A month ago, even 2 weeks ago, the answer would have been obvious. Of course, she'd take it. It's Cambridge. It's everything she's worked for. But now, looking at James, imagining walking away from what they've rebuilt, imagining another 8 years of wondering what if, the answer isn't obvious at all. But James sees the hesitation in her face and interprets it as confirmation. It's okay. I understand. It's your dream job. You should take it. Is that what you want me to do? What I want doesn't matter. This is your decision, Emma. I'm not going to be the reason you give up your dreams. Not again. You weren't the reason last time. That's not fair, isn't it? 8 years ago I took an assignment and you called off our wedding. Now you're taking a position and we're going to, what? Try long distance. Pretend that 3 months is enough time to build something strong enough to survive careers that exist on opposite sides of the world. We both know how this ends. Here it is, the fight they've been avoiding, the fear underneath all the hope. The question neither of them wanted to ask. Are they really any different than they were 8 years ago? Or are they just two people repeating the same patterns with marginally more self-awareness? Emma feels something crack in her chest. Not her heart breaking, but something else. Something that's been locked up for 8 years. The part of her that's been so afraid of being abandoned that she became the one who leaves first. The part that's been choosing independence over vulnerability, safety over risk, loneliness over the possibility of being hurt again. And she realizes that James is right about one thing. They do know how this ends. They know because they've already seen it. But they also know what it looks like to choose differently. They've spent 75 days choosing differently. The question is, are they brave enough to keep choosing differently, even when it's hard? You're right, Emma says, slowly. We do know how this ends if we make the same choices we made before. So let's make different ones. Let's stop treating this like an either-or. I take Cambridge, or we stay together. You take the Arctic, or I keep my dream job. One, if it's an instead of or. What if I take Cambridge, and we make it work? What if you take the Arctic, and we coordinate schedules and make time, and do all the hard, boring work that successful long-distance relationships require? That's hard. Yes. Complicated? Absolutely. But so is everything worth having. James, 8 years ago we failed because we were kids who thought love meant never having to compromise or communicate or do anything difficult. We thought if it's real love, it would just work. But that's not how love works. Love is choosing each other every day, even when it's inconvenient. Love is having hard conversations and making sacrifices and figuring out logistics. Love is doing the work. James is staring at her like he's seeing someone new. Someone he doesn't quite recognize but desperately wants to. You really want to try this? Long distance across continents, with demanding careers and limited time? I really want to try. Because the alternative is walking away from you again, and James, I can't. I physically cannot make myself do it. I've done it once, and it nearly destroyed me, and I'm not strong enough or stupid enough to do it again. So, yes, I want Cambridge. And I want you. and I'm willing to work twice as hard to have both because that's what adults do. They don't choose between their dreams and their relationships. They build lives big enough to hold everything that matters. The silence that follows is heavy with possibility and terror, and the weight of a decision that will determine the entire trajectory of their future. Then James crosses the room, takes Emma's face in his hands, and kisses her with an intensity that tastes like relief and commitment and the terrifying freedom of choosing vulnerability over safety. "Okay," he says against her lips. "Okay, let's try. Let's do the hard work. Let's build something big enough to hold both of us and our ridiculous careers and all our baggage and all our dreams. Let's choose each other, even when it's complicated. Especially when it's complicated." And just like that, the crisis that threatened to destroy them becomes instead the moment they prove they're different from who they were 8 years ago. They're not kids playing at commitment anymore. They're adults making informed decisions with full knowledge of the costs and the risks and the work it will require. And somehow that makes all the difference. But the universe isn't quite done with them yet. Because just when Emma and James think they've navigated the worst of it, just when they've made their choice and committed to doing the work, the real test arrives. And it arrives in the form of James's documentary footage. Marcus insists on a screening, standard protocol to review the material before the mission ends. The entire team gathers in the common room, while James projects his footage onto the wall. It starts with establishing shots, the vast Antarctic landscape, the research station, the team at work. Then it shifts to focus on the science, on Emma's research, on the catastrophic data they've been collecting about ice shelf collapse. The footage is stunning, Emmy-worthy, probably Peabody-worthy, the kind of work that launches careers and influences policy and makes people care about climate change in visceral, immediate ways. But it's also intimate in ways that make Emma's breath catch. Because James hasn't just filmed the research. He's filmed the researcher. He's captured Emma in unguarded moments, explaining data with passion lighting up her face, staring at ice cores with concentration so intense she forgets the camera exists, laughing at Raphael's jokes, listening to Marcus's stories with the attention she gives everything that matters to her. And threaded through all of it is a love letter. You can see it in every frame, every angle, every choice James made about what to film and how to film it. This isn't just a documentary about climate science. It's a documentary about a woman who devoted her life to understanding how the planet is changing, made by a man who's devoted his life to understanding her. The team watches in awed silence. When the rough cut ends, Yuki is crying. Marcus is nodding with professional appreciation. Rodriguez is trying to hide a smile, and Emma is staring at the now blank wall, trying to process what she just saw, herself through James's eyes. Not Dr. Chen, the climate scientist, but Emma the woman, brilliant and driven and beautiful and entirely, completely loved. "It's good," Marcus says, which coming from him is equivalent to an Oscar. "James, this is exceptional work. The personal angle makes the science accessible without diminishing it. This could really make a difference." But Emma barely hears him. She's too busy realizing that James has been making her this love letter for 75 days, has been capturing their story in ways she didn't fully understand, has been creating something that will exist long after. The mission ends, permanent evidence that they tried, that they loved each other, that they chose each other even when it was terrifying and complicated, and required more courage than either of them thought they possessed. Later, alone in James's quarters, she turns to him with tears in her eyes. "That footage, James, I told you I kept writing letters. The documentary is just another letter. Just another way of telling you what I can't always put into words, that you're extraordinary. That watching you work is watching someone operate at the absolute peak of their powers. That loving you doesn't make me smaller. It makes me want to be better, to work harder, to create things worth of the life you're building. I don't know what to say. Say you'll let me keep filming. That you'll let me document not just your research, but your life. That we'll build something together. Me behind the camera. You changing the bold. Both of us choosing each other, even when it would be easier not to." So Emma says yes. She says yes to Cambridge and to James, and to the hard work of coordinating two lives that exist on different continents. She says yes to long-distance calls and carefully coordinated vacations, and the boring logistics of international relationships. She says yes to being vulnerable, and being seen, and being loved in ways that terrify her. She says yes to all of it because the alternative, walking away again, protecting herself again, choosing safety over risk again, isn't really living. It's surviving. And Emma Chen is done merely surviving. The question is, will yes be enough? Will their determination and maturity and hard-won wisdom be sufficient to overcome the same obstacles that destroyed them before? Or are they just two people making the same mistake twice, this time with their eyes wide open? The answer will come, but not yet. For now, they have 3 more months in Antarctica, 3 more months of frozen mornings and ice core data and falling asleep in each other's arms. 3 more months to strengthen what they've built before the real test begins. 3 more months before they find out if love is truly enough, or if sometimes, despite your best efforts and your deepest commitment and your willingness to do the work, some things just aren't meant to be. Here's the question nobody asks when they're falling in love for the second time. What happens when the crisis is over and real life begins again? What happens when you leave the isolated bubble where your relationship was forged and step back into the world with all its demands and distractions and 1,000 ways to drift apart? Emma and James are about to find out. Because the final month at Glacier Point Station passes like a dream. Work and love and the comfortable intimacy of two people who've decided to choose each other. But dreams end when you wake up, and on day 143, they board a cargo plane heading back to civilization, back to separate continents, back to the lives they built without each other. The question isn't whether they love each other anymore. The question is, will love be enough when they're no longer trapped together by ice and isolation, when the real work of building a relationship begins? The flight from Antarctica feels longer than the flight there, weighted with everything left unsaid. Emma stares out the window, watching the ice disappear beneath clouds, and her mind is already racing ahead, to Cambridge, to the director position that starts in 6 weeks, to the apartment she'll need to find, and the team she'll need to build, and the research agenda she'll need to establish. She spent her entire career preparing for this opportunity, and now that it's here, all she can think about is the man sitting 3 rows behind her, who's heading to New York for post-production before his Arctic assignment begins. 6 weeks. That's all they have before distance turns theoretical into actual, before choosing each other becomes a daily decision instead of an inevitable fact of their shared environment. James is filming the flight, documenting their departure the way he's documented everything else. But Emma knows him well enough now to see the tension in his shoulders, the way he keeps glancing at her, like he's memorizing her features for a test he's afraid he'll fail. They've talked about logistics, about video calls and visit schedules, and the importance of communication. They've made plans and promises and commitments. But sitting on this plane, reality is setting in with uncomfortable clarity. They're about to enter the hardest phase of any relationship, the phase where good intentions meet. Exhaustion and busy schedules and the slow erosion of connection that happens when you're not in the same room, breathing the same air, falling asleep to the sound of each other's heartbeat. They land in Christchurch, New Zealand. After 15 hours in the air, the team disperses. Marcus to his university in California, Rodriguez back to her family in Texas, Yuki to Japan, Rafael to Argentina. Hugs and promises to stay in touch, and the bittersweet acknowledgement that they've been through something extraordinary together, something that will bond them forever even as their lives diverge back to normal. Emma watches them leave one by one, and each departure feels like a small death, like pieces of the experience breaking off and drifting away. Soon, it's just her and James in a hotel room that feels too large after months of tiny quarters, too anonymous after the forced intimacy of station life, too quiet after the constant hum of generators and wind and people living on top of each other. 6 weeks, James says, unpacking his camera equipment with the methodical precision of someone who needs his hands busy. That's not so bad. We've already survived 6 months of Antarctica. 6 weeks in the real world should be easy. But they both know he's lying. Antarctica was hard in physical ways. The cold, the danger, the isolation. But emotionally, it was simple. They were forced together, forced to confront their past, forced to work through their issues because avoiding each other wasn't an option. Now avoidance is very much an option. Now there are flights to catch and emails to answer, and 1,000 perfectly legitimate reasons to postpone difficult conversations, or skip a video call, or let days slip by without meaningful connection. Now they have to choose each other actively, deliberately, without the helpful constraint of being the only two people each other has. They spend 3 days in Christchurch trying to cram a lifetime of normal couple activities into 72 hours. Dinners at real restaurants with menus longer than 3 items. Walks through parks that aren't made of ice. Sleeping in a bed that's actually comfortable. They're trying to build normalcy, to prove that what they had in Antarctica can survive outside it. But there's a franticness to it, an undercurrent of desperation that neither of them wants to acknowledge. They're not building a foundation. They're cramming for a test they're terrified of failing. On the 4th day, Emma flies to London. On the 5th day, James flies to New York. And just like that, the physical distance that was theoretical becomes actual. 8 time zones, 5,000 miles. The length of a video call away, which sounds close until you're trying to coordinate schedules across continents and realizing that when Emma's starting her day, James is ending his, and the windows for conversation are small and getting smaller as work consumes them both. Cambridge welcomes Emma with the kind of enthusiasm reserved for celebrated hires. She's given the director's office, large, light-filled, overlooking the courtyard where Newton supposedly watched an apple fall. She's given a team of 12 researchers, a budget that makes her previous grants look like pocket change, and the kind of institutional support she's dreamed about her entire career. This is it. This is everything she's worked for, and it's overwhelming and exhilarating and utterly consuming in ways she didn't anticipate. Because being a director isn't just about research anymore. It's about management and politics and fundraising and 1,000 administrative tasks that have nothing to do with science and everything to do with keeping the institution running. The first week, Emma works 18-hour days, setting up her lab and meeting with stakeholders and learning the systems. She collapses into bed exhausted and barely has energy to text James goodnight, let alone have a meaningful conversation. The second week isn't better. The third week, she realizes with creeping horror that she's becoming exactly what Marcus warned her about. Someone so consumed by work that relationships become an afterthought, something to tend to when she has time, which she never does. James, meanwhile, is drowning in post-production. The Antarctic documentary is good, better than good. It's extraordinary. And his production company wants to fast-track it for festival submissions, which means 18-hour days in editing bays, reviewing hundreds of hours of footage, crafting a narrative that does justice to both the science and the personal story. He's working with editors and sound designers and composers, all of whom need decisions and direction, and his constant input. And buried in all that footage is Emma. Emma talking about climate change, Emma taking ice core samples, Emma laughing at dinner, Emma looking at him with love in her eyes. He's editing their love story while living through the slow realization that love stories require more than good intentions and deep feelings. They require time, and time is the one thing neither of them has enough of. Their first video call happens 10 days after leaving Antarctica. Emma looks exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing a sweatshirt that's definitely not professional but was the only clean thing she could find. James looks equally wrecked, stubble because he forgot to shave, bloodshot eyes from too many hours staring at screens. They smile at each other through the pixels and try to pretend this is fine, this is normal, this is what modern relationships look like. "How's Cambridge?" James asks. "Intense. Good, but intense. The team is great. The resources are incredible. But it's so much more administrative work than I expected. I miss just being a researcher." Emma pauses. "How's editing?" "Brutal. But the footage is coming together." "Emma, you're going to love it. It's—" He stops, something crossing his face that looks like pain. "It's us. The whole documentary is us, even the parts that aren't about us. I don't know if that makes sense." "It makes sense." Emma wants to say more, wants to tell him she misses him with a physical ache, that she lies awake at night wondering if they're making a terrible mistake, that she's terrified this isn't going to work. But saying those things feels like admitting defeat, like acknowledging doubt, and they're both too stubborn and too scared to be that honest yet. So instead they talk about logistics and schedules and when they might be able to visit, and the conversation is loving but surface level, and when they hang up, Emma feels more lonely than she did before the call. This becomes their pattern. Video calls every few days, texts in between, conversations that are affectionate but increasingly shallow, because neither of them has the energy for depth. They're both working too hard, sleeping too little, running on fumes and caffeine, and the increasingly desperate hope that this phase is temporary, that once they settle into their new roles, they'll have more time for each other. But the truth is, the work isn't temporary. The work is their lives, and they're starting to realize what they didn't want to admit back in Antarctica. You can't build a relationship in the margins. You can't love someone with your leftover energy and stolen moments and half-focused attention. Love requires presence, and presence is exactly what neither of them can give. Week 4. Emma has a breakthrough. Her team discovers evidence of accelerated Antarctic melting that could reshape climate predictions. It's huge, potentially Nobel Prize level huge, and it requires immediate action. More funding, more personnel, more of Emma's time and attention and energy. She be thrilled. This is exactly the kind of work she came to Cambridge to do. But all she can think about is that this discovery means she definitely can't visit James next month like they planned. This means another video call where she has to explain that work is taking precedence, where she has to watch his face try to hide disappointment, where they both pretend this is fine and sustainable when it's clearly neither. She calls James to tell him about the discovery. He answers from his editing bay, and she can see the fatigue etched into every line of his face. That's incredible, Em. I'm so proud of you. It means I can't come to New York next month. Emma hates how small her voice sounds. I'm sorry. I know we planned. It's okay. I get it. This is important work. And James means it. She can hear in his voice that he genuinely understands, genuinely supports her. But she can also hear what he's not saying. That understanding doesn't make it hurt less. That supporting her career doesn't make him feel less alone. That they're slipping into exactly the pattern they swore they'd avoid. When do you leave for the Arctic? Emma asks, even though she knows the answer. 6 weeks. James runs a hand through his hair. A gesture Emma recognizes as stress, assuming I finish post-production in time, which I will because I have to. Emma, maybe I should postpone the Arctic contract. Maybe we need to... No, Emma cuts him off firmly. James, no. You're not postponing your career for me. That's exactly what we agreed we wouldn't do. We both take our opportunities, and we make it work. That was the deal. But what if the deal isn't working? What if we're so busy making it work that we're not actually making anything at all? James's voice cracks slightly, and Emma realizes with a jolt that he's on the edge of breaking. That the strong, supportive partner who's been understanding about every canceled plan and every postponed visit is reaching his limit. I miss you. I miss you so much it physically hurts. And I know that sounds dramatic, but it's true. I miss talking to you about things that matter. I miss falling asleep next to you. I miss you being more than pixels on a screen. I'm trying to be supportive and understanding and the perfect long-distance partner. But Emma, I'm drowning. I'm drowning in work and loneliness and the growing fear that we're going to wake up in 6 months and realize we've become strangers who occasionally video chat. The words land like stones in water, creating ripples that spread through everything. Because James has just said the thing they've both been thinking, but neither wanted to acknowledge. They're not making it work. They're surviving, and survival isn't the same thing as thriving. Survival is just not dying. And their relationship is dying, slowly, incrementally. Death by 1,000 postponed visits and surface-level conversations, and the gradual erosion of intimacy that happens when you're too tired to be vulnerable and too busy to prioritize connection. Emma feels something crack inside her chest. Not her heart breaking. She's had her heart broken before, and this feels different. This feels like the walls she's been maintaining finally crumbling, like the last of her defenses giving way. Like the moment when you stop protecting yourself and start being honest about how scared you are. I'm scared, she whispers. James, I'm terrified. I'm terrified that you're right, that we're going to lose each other again, and I don't know how to fix it. I don't know how to be the director of a major research institute and be present for you and not lose myself in the process. I don't know how to do all of it. Maybe, James says carefully, you don't have to do all of it alone. Maybe that's the problem. We're both trying to do everything independently and just merge our lives in the gaps. But Emma, there are no gaps. Our lives are full. They're always going to be full. So maybe, instead of trying to find time for each other, we need to make time. Maybe we need to restructure our lives in ways that are uncomfortable, require sacrifices, and don't look like what we thought they'd look like. What does that mean? I don't know yet. But I know this isn't working. I know I can't do 6 more weeks of this, let alone 6 months of me in the Arctic and you in Cambridge. I know something has to change, or we're going to lose each other for the second time. And Emma, I can't survive that. I barely survived it the first time. They sit in silence, both of them processing, both of them faced with the same impossible question. What are they willing to sacrifice? What compromises are they willing to make? How much of their carefully built lives are they willing to restructure for the chance, not the guarantee, just the chance, that their relationship might work? The next day, Emma does something she's never done in her entire career. She takes a day off. She tells her team she's unavailable, turns off her email, and spends 8 hours thinking about what she wants, about what she's willing to give up, about the difference between compromise and sacrifice, about whether the life she's built, impressive and successful and utterly lonely, is actually the life she wants to live. She calls Marcus. He answers from his office in California, surprised to hear from her. Emma, is everything okay? I need advice about work-life balance, about relationships and careers, about how you lost your marriage and what you learned from it. There's pause. Then Marcus's voice, gentle and knowing. You're realizing that having everything doesn't mean much if you have no one to share it with. Is that what happened to you? That's exactly what happened. I chose work every single time. Every dinner I missed, every vacation I postponed, every conversation I was too tired to have. Each individual choice seemed reasonable, but they added up to a life where work was everything, and my wife was an afterthought. By the time I realized what I'd lost, it was too late. Marcus sighs. Emma, success isn't measured by titles or publications or even Nobel Prizes. It's measured by whether you become the person you want to be. And I became someone very impressive and very alone. Don't make my mistake. Emma hangs up and makes a decision. It's terrifying and exhilarating and feels both exactly right and completely insane. She emails Cambridge's board, requesting a meeting. She calls James and tells him to fly to London. And 2 days later, she sits across from administrators who look concerned and confused as she presents them with a proposal that will either secure her future or destroy her career. I want to restructure the director position, Emma says, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Part-time, 3 days a week in person, 2 days remote. I'll take a salary cut. I'll give up some administrative responsibilities. But I need flexibility. I need to build a life that isn't just work. The administrators exchange glances. The head of the board, a severe woman named Dr. Sheffield, leans forward. Dr. Chen, we hired you because you're the best. We need someone fully committed to this position. And you have someone fully committed. But commitment doesn't mean sacrifice. It doesn't mean working myself to exhaustion. It means doing excellent work while also having a life worth living. I can do both. I can be an exceptional director and have time for relationships and rest and the things that make me human. But I need you to let me try. There's a long silence. Then Dr. Sheffield smiles, a small, knowing smile that suggests she understands more than Emma realized. My husband gave me an ultimatum 20 years ago. Restructure my career or lose my marriage. I chose my career. I've regretted it every day since. She looks at the other board members. I think Dr. Chen's proposal is reasonable. Let's approve it. Just like that, Emma restructures her life. Not perfectly. There will still be long days and stressful deadlines and times when work demands more than she wants to give. But she creates space. She builds margins into her schedule where James can exist. She prioritizes presence over productivity. She chooses relationship over reputation. When she tells James he's in a London hotel room, having dropped everything to fly over when she asked, his face cycles through shock and disbelief and something that looks like hope. You did that? You really did that? I did. Because you're right. We can't build a relationship in the margins. So I'm not going to try anymore. I'm restructuring my margins. I'm making room for you, for us, for the life I want to have, instead of the life I thought I was supposed to want. Emma, your turn. What are you willing to change? James takes a deep breath. I called the production company. I'm turning down the Arctic contract. I'm staying in Europe. There are plenty of documentary opportunities here. I'm restructuring too, because having the career of my dreams doesn't mean much if I'm living it alone. There it is, the moment when two people stop trying to have everything and start choosing what matters most. The moment when ambition and love stop being in competition and start being in conversation. The moment when Emma and James finally learned the lesson it took 8 years and 2 breakups to understand. You don't choose between your dreams and your relationships. You choose how to integrate them. You choose what you're willing to compromise and what's non-negotiable. You choose each other, not despite your ambitions, but within the context of them. 6 months later, Emma and James sit in a theater watching the premiere of Frozen Hearts, a love letter to science and second chances. The documentary is everything James promised. Stunning cinematography, compelling science, and threaded through it all, the story of 2 people who found each other again in the coldest place on Earth and had to learn how to stay warm once they returned to the world. The audience is riveted. Critics will call it a masterpiece. It will win awards and influence policy and make people care about climate change in visceral, immediate ways. But Emma isn't watching the screen. She's watching James watch his work be received by the world. And she's thinking about the choices they made, about Cambridge and restructured schedules and compromises that felt impossible until they weren't, about James in London, 3 days a week, editing and filming and building a European career base, about weekends together, and video calls that are actually about connection instead of logistics, about learning to build a life that's big enough to hold both their dreams without requiring either of them to become smaller. It's not perfect. Some weeks, Emma resents the administrative work she still has to do. Some weeks, James wishes he'd taken the Arctic contract. Some weeks they argue about schedules and priorities and the 1,000 small frictions that come with coordinating two ambitious lives. But it's real, it's honest, it's a relationship built on choosing each other every day, not because they're trapped by circumstance, but because they genuinely want to. After the premiere, they walk through London, hand in hand. James pulls out his camera. He's always filming, always documenting, and turns it on Emma. Dr. Chen, final question for the documentary. What did you learn in Antarctica? Emma thinks about it, about ice and isolation and second chances, about 8 years of pain that led to growth, about the difference between surviving and thriving, about learning that the bravest thing you can do isn't protecting yourself from hurt. It's choosing vulnerability anyway. I learned, Emma says slowly, that love isn't about grand gestures or perfect circumstances. It's about daily choices. It's about restructuring your life to make room for what matters. It's about being brave enough to say, I need you, and I'm scared, and I'm willing to change. I learned that you can run to the end of the earth to escape your past, but eventually you have to stop running and face it. And I learned that sometimes the coldest place on earth is exactly where you need to go to remember how to be warm. James lowers the camera. That's beautiful. But here's my question for you. Was it worth it? All the pain and the fear and the restructuring and the compromise. Was it worth it? Emma looks at him, this man who saved her life and broke her heart and taught her what it means to actually choose someone. Ask me in 50 years. James laughs. Deal? They walk on through London streets, two people who loved and lost and found each other again, who learned the hard way that happy endings aren't about perfect circumstances. They're about imperfect people making daily choices to show up for each other. Their story doesn't end here. It probably never ends. It just continues, day by day, choice by choice, building something real and messy and ultimately worth every difficult moment it took to get here. So here's my question for you. When was the last time you chose vulnerability over safety? When was the last time you restructured your life for something that mattered? When was the last time you were brave enough to say, I need this, and then did the work to make it happen? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your stories of second chances, of difficult compromises, of choosing love even when it's terrifying. And if this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to choose between ambition and relationship, if you're navigating your own frozen landscape trying to figure out how to stay warm, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because maybe the most important thing Emma and James learned is this: you don't have to do it alone. Sometimes the bravest thing is asking for help, accepting support, and building something together instead of trying to have everything independently. So tell me, what are you choosing? What are you willing to change? And most importantly, who are you willing to change for? I'll see you in the comments.